NFL Week 3 is upon us. Nick Whalen, John McKechnie here with you, breaking everything down from a betting perspective. John, Week 2, a lot of carnage in Survivor contest, a lot of carnage for the public. One of the all-time days for a sportsbook. If you're a sportsbook operator and you're listening to this podcast, congratulations on your big Week 2. John, underdogs were 11-4-1 against the spread last week. We continue to see, these big underdogs not only covering, but a lot of these underdogs winning straight up. Some of the biggest dogs of the season, dogs of at least 7 points, are 3-0 straight up on the year through 2 weeks. Underdogs of at least 6 points are 8-0 already against the spread. Man, public teams, John, are 11-20-1 against the numbers so far. The books continue to clean up. How do we take a trend like this and spin it forward now to Week 3? I think it's appealing or perhaps tempting to look at some of these 6, 6.5, 7.5 point favorites that we have on the Week 3 board and say, man, dogs are killing it. We just got to keep riding dogs. But at some point, we know that trend is going to at least partially reverse.
Right. I think things are going to start to correct here, but it is interesting. And I think that, with scoring being down across the league, that it kind of opens up these games and these underdogs to, games with a little bit more variance to it, where 1 or 2 plays can really kind of flip the entire deal. And so, we have a couple of games this week that I think fit that bill. I think that the Giants going to Cleveland to face the Browns, like no one wants to bet the Giants, right? Like no one feels good about that. However, that game's going to be really low scoring. We're seeing the total under 40 points. Like a fluky play by Cleveland that goes the wrong way could swing that entire game or swing at least the spread, for example. So I do think that, we're going to start to see some correction as far as favorites starting to cover. But I think as long as scoring remains down, and it's way down. I mean, we all saw the viral stats earlier this week about, we're about 20 touchdowns through the air off the pace of last year, which was already pretty low. So it's tricky to really see exactly how it's going to progress from here. I think that, hopefully aesthetically, I like seeing good run games out there. So I'm appreciating that thus far. But, all told, this sets up as a really interesting week. And we do have, some more games this week that fit this current trend ongoing with these big dogs, although no huge dogs just yet. We haven't seen a single favorite of 10 or more points just yet.
We have not. And that is the first time in NFL history, at least as far back as NFL betting goes, data that we could track. We've never had the first 3 weeks of the season without a double-digit dog. And, maybe we get there by Sunday, but it's going to take some crazy news because the biggest favorite of the week right now is the Cincinnati Bengals at 7.5. They are home for the Washington Commanders. I will ask you this, John. I know you brought up the Giants, and I have some interest in the New York Giants this week as well. If you had to take one of these big dogs, whether it's the Giants, whether it's Denver, whether it's the LA Rams or the Washington Commanders, which of these, 6+ point dogs do you think would have the best chance to cover this week?
I think it would have to be either of the 2 representatives from the NFC Beast. I think either the Giants or the Commanders would be my lean there. On Washington's side, they won a very fluky game against the Giants last week, of course. No touchdowns, but they scored 21 points. Daniel Jones was actually mistake-free in that game, and Washington still found a way to come out on top. I do kind of like Washington against the number. I don't know if they're going to do it outright, but the Bengals, we know that we knew that they were going to get up for that game against the Chiefs. It is a Monday night game, but are they going to be able to get up the same way against the Commanders? We saw them really kind of sleepwalk in a game against the Rams on a Monday night last year, and we didn't know the Rams were quite who they ended up being at that point because they had such a rough 2022. So I give Washington a slight puncher's chance. The Giants, we'll get into it a little bit more, but I do think that it's more just a statement that Cleveland is really not all that good, or I think they're at least very beatable, and I think that offense is very anemic. When it comes to Denver, that's just such a tall task for them to go to Tampa Bay with the way that the Bucs are playing, and the Rams, they're just so beat up right now. It's really hard to envision them coming out, but it is a divisional game, of course.
You mentioned the field goal rate offense for the Commanders in week 2. Obviously, they were 0 of 6 in the red zone. I went and looked back at the drive chart just to see, what kind of situations were the Commanders in They kicked those 7 field goals, John, starting with the following situations. They had a 1st and 10 at the Giants 24, 1st and 10 at the 14, 1st and 10 at the 13, 1st and 10 at the 11, 1st and 10 at the 10, 1st and goal at the 8, 1st and goal at the 6. All 7 of those situations turned into a field goal for the Washington Commanders. So they'll have to get that red zone offense going if they want to hang with the Cincinnati Bengals. I think that Bengals offense is just going to overpower what might be the worst defense in the NFL so far in the Commanders. But we'll talk more about those games as we go along. John, we mentioned it in the open. Every week, each of us are going to pick 3 games that we want to discuss. I'll give you the leadoff spot. Where are we going first?
Okay, so this one's a little bit in flux here because earlier in the day when we were getting our prep work in, Tennessee was favored by 3 points. But as injury reports come in, Jordan Love was out there for a little bit today for Green Bay. So that obviously alters things. His absence, of course, altered things in a massive way last week, where Green Bay was 4.5-point favorites on the look ahead, ended up being 2.5-point underdogs, end up winning outright, which was, bonkers. But it was just one of those games that it just got so public by the time that Friday rolled around. It's like, Green Bay's going to win this game somehow. It's too weird. But my main case for Tennessee, again, this is under the assumption that it is ultimately Malik Willis starting for Green Bay. I do think it's a little bit smoke and mirrors from Green Bay. I do think that they're going to kind of hold that tension, hold the suspense when it comes to Love's status up until the Friday injury report is released. So I do think that it is ultimately Malik Willis under center for Green Bay. And I just, as good of a coach as LaFleur is, and as good of a job as he did a week ago, I don't really see that game plan carrying over to a second week. It's not something in a one-off situation like it was a week ago. You can understand where Green Bay finds a way to win, especially at home, especially running the ball the way they did against a terrible Indianapolis rush defense. I think Tennessee has a good rush defense. They're going to be able to keep a lid on Josh Jacobs a little bit. And, if Love plays, we're going to have to reframe this whole thing. I see the line is down to 1.5 in favor of Tennessee, just over the last couple of hours. So things are moving. Keep an eye on this. But if things settle back in and it is Malik Willis starting for Green Bay, give me the Titans. The Titans have been close to covering each of their first 2 weeks. Levis, for the love of God, just don't do something boneheaded. I know that's asking a lot, but please.
Statistically speaking, it's unlikely that Will Levis goes a 3rd straight week with a killer turnover, right? I think that's part of the case if you're a Tennessee bettor. And you're right that there, as we record this on Wednesday evening, there are some 1.5s out there. There's still some 2.5s as well. And keep in mind, we saw this a little bit with Green Bay last week, right? Where it wasn't really until Friday, Saturday that we had full clarity. It was in fact going to be Malik Willis. I think there is some gamesmanship afoot here for the Green Bay Packers. But even if it is Jordan Love, I kind of took an informal poll of some Packers fans here in the state of Wisconsin. I'm like, do you guys even want Jordan Love to start? And it was kind of a mixed bag, right? It's like, if he's not fully 100% based on how Green Bay looked last week, I think there's some belief that, maybe you could still win this game with Malik Willis. I'm with you. I think the chances of repeating that game script 2 weeks in a row are pretty low. I thought Indy looked completely unprepared to be facing Malik Willis. It's like they had no idea that Jordan Love was out until the first snap of the game when Malik Willis comes trotting out there. I just don't understand it. I mean, they were not prepared for the Josh Jacobs 30-plus carry game. I do think Malik Willis did about as good of a job managing that game as you could ask, right? Made a really nice throw to Dontavian Wicks for a touchdown. That was one where if that's a foot inside, it might have been a pick 6, but it wasn't. It was a great throw. Kind of threw a jump ball up to Romeo Doubs, let him do the rest of it. I think Malik Willis he proved last week that he can at least effectively game manage, but I think it's a little bit different when you've put all of that on tape the week before against a divisional opponent in the Indianapolis Colts. And that Colts defense, by the way, my goodness. I mean, this is 2 straight weeks where they've been completely gashed on the ground. I will say, by the way, I do like Tony Pollard quite a bit this week. We'll get to him when we talk some props later, but I'm not really convinced on this Packers run defense specifically. I know they've been an opportune defense in terms of generating some turnovers. They picked off Anthony Richardson 3 times last week, but they were gashed by Saquon Barkley in that Eagles running game in week 1. For some reason, the Colts only ran Jonathan Taylor 12 times last week, even though he was getting like 9 yards per carry. So I'm not saying Tony Pollard is going to be at that level, but I think this is a pretty good spot for Tennessee to lean on the run against Green Bay. My first game, John, we are going to New Orleans, the state of Louisiana, where the New Orleans Saints, who are 2-0 now, as you may know, They are 2.5-point home favorites for the Philadelphia Eagles. Huge line movement just in the last couple of days. You knew there was going to be some pro-Saints sentiment coming out of that win over Dallas, but really once Philly went down on Monday night against Atlanta, we saw this line move all the way from, Eagles -3, -2.5, now to the Saints as 2.5-point favorites. And there were some threes out there earlier in the week. I'm buying in on the New Orleans Saints, perhaps recklessly so, but what they've done these last 2 weeks has been overwhelmingly convincing, right? I mean, they've scored on 15 straight drives to open the last 2 games. I think it was 8 or 9 in a row against Carolina and then 6 in a row against the Dallas Cowboys. This is a team that looks completely different from last year. And it's not often that an offensive coordinator can make that big of a difference when you're essentially bringing back the same personnel. But man, I mean, this is a night and day, just watching them via the eye test, right? And Chris Olave hasn't even been that involved yet. It feels like they're still yet to unlock him. Obviously, you can't depend on Alvin Kamara giving you 4 touchdowns every single week, but there's, I think, a little bit more to explore with the Saints passing game. And I think they're catching the Eagles at a really good time. No A.J. Brown for the second straight week, coming off of a devastating loss at home. I don't really get the sense that anybody on this team really trusts this coaching staff. I mean, they've won, 2 games out of their last 9. It's a short week. Jalen Hurts is 3-7 ATS in his last 10 starts as an underdog. He's 2-7 straight up in those last 9 games, 1-8 against the spread during that span. Derek Carr, he's 22-37-2 as a favorite. That is a concern. We are putting faith behind Derek Carr after all, for as good as the Saints have looked these last couple of weeks. But I think the Saints could keep it going, man. I think this is a Philly defense that I do not trust right now. They're giving up 7.5 yards per carry when lined up in a 2-deep shell. Got that note via The Athletic earlier today. They're 31st in pressure rate right now, 27th in run defense, giving up 6.4 yards per carry overall. I love the spot for New Orleans.
Yeah, maybe at some point this season, defenses will be able to counter adjust for what New Orleans is doing. Not right now. Not right now. I think we're still too early on. I think teams are still trying to gather data to figure out the ways you can stop them. And I don't think Philadelphia on the defensive side, personnel-wise, has the goods. I mean, they've been getting run all over in addition to being completely unable to generate a pass rush. I mean, the linebacking core is small, slow, or some combination of the two. And they're on a short week. And like you said, they're coming off that tough loss where, I think you look at the two kind of favorites in the NFC coming into the season, right? You look at the Niners and the Eagles, and both of them I had some concerns about coming into the year. And whereas the Niners go on the road and lose to a Vikings team last week, I'm less concerned about them. I think the Eagles, with the way they kind of crash landed their season last year, Monday's game kind of makes you wonder, like, are we going to see a continuation of that this year? Because that was a big question about the Eagles generally coming into this year, is like, how real is that? How able are they going to be to fix that tailspin that they went into down the stretch where they, start out getting to 10 wins and fail to get to 12. Really, really embarrassing loss by them in the postseason. The vibes are still just kind of off, and no A.J. Brown obviously really hurt them on Monday night as well. So as long as that's continuing, which it looks like it's going to, that's tough. And yes, the Saints are just going to be really difficult to figure out in the short term. And while I was kind of crapping on their home field advantage, I think in week 1 when they were playing against the Panthers, no, if the Dome's rocking, that's still a tough place to play. And I think it's absolutely going to be rocking after the start that the Saints have had.
All right. What's your second game, John?
All right. Let's dig into that San Francisco 49ers side of things, because like we said at the top of the show, big favorites have been a no-go. They have been kryptonite to your bankrolls to start this season. And you're looking at a Niners team that's coming off of a loss. They are on the road for a second week in a row. They are playing without Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel, and they're giving 7 points. I love the Niners even still. I think the Rams are a wounded animal, and that can be interpreted a couple ways. Sometimes it's like, okay, their backs are against the wall, you don't want to mess with them. They're like the kind of wounded animal that's like, this is not going to go well. They are not the dangerous kind of wounded animal, are the Rams. The Rams are giving up 9.9 yards per pass attempt thus far. John Johnson, the defensive back, just went on injured reserve. And, for as good as McVay's numbers are against the spread, against divisional opponents, the Niners have actually been the one kind of caveat to that. I believe McVay is 5-10 against the spread against the Niners. Stafford hasn't been good against the Niners in his own right. You're missing Puka Nacua. You're missing Cooper Kupp. Like, I don't want to cast the Rams into damnation the way that they fell into it in 2022, but man, the injuries are piling up in such a way, and the Niners coming off a loss, they're going to want to correct that quickly. I think that this one could get pretty ugly at SoFi.
I tend to agree with you on this. And, again, we don't want to fall into this trap of, just thinking, how could the 49ers possibly lose to this Rams team? Because I think a lot of people felt that way about the Niners last week against Minnesota. But I think the point that rings most true to me is that the injuries have reached a critical mass for the LA Rams, right? This is not necessarily a lack of faith in Sean McVay or a lack of faith in Matthew Stafford or anything like that. It's half of your team is decimated, right? Your offensive line is completely decimated. You got all these young guys on defense. Now you take John Johnson away from that. I mean, this is already a bottom 3 pass rushing team. It's a bottom 3 tackling team, according to PFF. Those are not the metrics you want to have going up against the San Francisco 49ers. And, taking McCaffrey away, taking Deebo Samuel away, that certainly matters. I think this number is a little bit striking when you're talking about arguably your best 2 skill players on the roster. But you look at the remaining talent for the LA Rams without Nacua and without Cooper Kupp, there's not a lot there. You look at the remaining talent for the 49ers, you still have like 5 active blue chippers, right? I mean, you still got Trent Williams. You still got Nick Bosa. You still got Fred Warner on that defense. You still have a very, very capable wide receiver in Brandon Ayuk, who I think could be poised for a big week. So I don't think we see a redux of last week where, the Rams are like down 24-3 and that game is just over early on. Like, I think there is a backs against the wall. We can't go 0-3. Our season's basically over if we lose this game element here. I mean, this is kitchen sink territory for Sean McVay, but I think over the course of 4 quarters, the 49ers health advantage essentially wins out. And like you said, I mean, Sean McVay is typically good against the division, typically good against the NFC. That's not the case against the Niners. That's been the team that he struggled against. San Francisco, by the way, 6-1 against the number in its last 7 divisional road games. So we like that trend if you're on the Niners. My second game, John, we're going to continue to ruthlessly target the Denver Broncos. They are 6.5-point dogs at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. We're fading the Broncos. We're fading Bo Nix. We're fading this passing game. Bo Nix cannot throw the ball downfield. I'm sure we've all seen the stat this week. He is 11 of 36 for 212 yards and 4 picks on passes that travel more than 5 yards downfield. If you watched that game last week, you know that a lot of those 212 yards came from running after the catch, from poor tackling for the Pittsburgh Steelers. There was also a 49-yard trick play that the Broncos hit where Bo Nix was lined up at receiver and essentially had a wide open Josh Reynolds down the field. That's kind of what it takes for the Broncos to generate big plays right now. And what happened immediately after completing the trick play? He threw a pick in the end zone. I mean, this guy is a walking turnover. I think this could be another, 1 or 2 interception week for Bo Nix. I don't know that Denver is going to be able to run the ball. They've been one of the worst running teams in the NFL so far. If they can, this gets a little bit dicey. Is Vita Vea out there for Tampa Bay? If he's not, how big of a difference can that make? And, I think the other side of this is, can Tampa Bay run the ball? Because, this is becoming, an issue that we are all too familiar with this Bucs team. They didn't really do a whole lot on the ground in a really, really good matchup against the Commanders in week 1. Obviously, it's a, kind of an obvious running script for the second half, but really didn't move the ball on the ground at all last week against Detroit. So if Denver can, force Tampa Bay into these 3rd and longs, into these obvious passing situations where you could kind of buckle down and try to get after Baker Mayfield, I can see this being a little bit closer, but I think Tampa Bay dodged its bullet last week. They had no business winning that game against the Detroit Lions. Got doubled up in terms of yardage. They were lucky that Detroit went 1 of 7 in the red zone. But I think you look at that as, all right, Tampa Bay probably should have lost that one. They'll refocus. They go back home here. You just get a Broncos team that does not have a ton of talent on either side of the ball. They lost their starting tackle, Mike McGlinchey, last week. I love the spot for Tampa Bay with the number hanging under 7.
Right. Under 7 makes it all the more appealing. The Broncos are just kind of dead in the water. Maybe there will be some progression at some point from Nix, but early on, like that offense is just so capped right now. And the run game detail on Tampa Bay's side, it is an issue that is going to rear its head at some point. But against the Broncos, I'm just less convinced of that. I tweeted out a stat. I was taking a look at Rachaad White stuff when I was looking up props for the show earlier. On RotoWire on the player pages, we've got this great kind of like infographic that kind of gives you a simple man like myself a green rating or a red rating. And Rachaad White grades very well as far as his percentage of his yards coming after contact. The problem is he basically gets no yards after contact. So what those statistics in tandem tell me is that he just gets hit and goes down, and it never goes far. So that is something that we're gonna have to maybe see Bucky Irving get a little bit more involved as the season goes on. But I think the Bucs are just totally happy to play to kind of ditch the run game and just attack your corners. And Surtain's obviously very scary, and that individual matchup against either Evans or Godwin will be interesting to watch. But whoever he's not covering, I think, is going to have himself a day. And yeah, the Broncos having to travel for this one, it all kind of is lining up well and nicely for Tampa.
All right, we each got one more game left, John. Where are we going for your third and final game of the week?
We will go to Seattle. In the same vein as your fading Bo Nix, I will fade Skylar Thompson. I think that, there's interesting stats going around about how backups have done against the spread in recent years, and that they've traditionally done well. But I think there's an important detail where can your backup quarterback do something similar to what the starting quarterback does? Can the offense generally have the same philosophy? And I think when you drop off from Tua to Skylar Thompson, that offense totally changes. You don't squeeze the juice out of like that insane group of skill talent in Miami with Skylar Thompson back there. It's going to be a lot of short passes. Defenses are going to be able to creep up and kind of slow down both Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. I think it's going to be pretty anemic. I think you also have the longest domestic trip that you could possibly take in the NFL, with Miami going up to Seattle. Seattle, obviously, they just had to fly back from the East Coast as well, but they've looked better than I expected. I thought that was a gutty win from them last week on the road in New England. And yeah, I'm so afraid of what Miami's going to be able to do offensively. Like there just might not be nothing or anything there. There might be an okay day for Achane, but like I'm considering benching Jalen Waddle in leagues where I have him for guys that I've picked up off the waiver wire. Like I think it's just that dire when it comes to the offensive outlook for Miami. And according to the Action Network, the Fins are 0-4 against the spread in true road games outside the Eastern time zone since he took over. So that's not a great trend for Miami, especially when you have Skylar Thompson back there. So keep an eye on this one. I wouldn't be surprised if we see this creep up to 5.5 by the weekend. But as it stands, 4.5, I really like Seattle.
Yeah, I'm with you on Seattle. It didn't make my list. I think there's enough wonkiness, if you will, with the Seahawks. I know they cleaned it up a little bit, compared to week one, but still needed overtime to beat the New England Patriots, who are a formidable opponent. And, you had to travel across the country for that game. So I get it. I worry a little bit about Seattle's inability to run the ball with Zach Charbonnet last week, again, against a good Patriots run defense. But still, we saw advancements in that passing game, 33 of 44 for Geno Smith, really getting DK Metcalf and JSN more involved. The thing that really worries me about Miami is that you still have Tyreek Hill, you still have Devon Achane, and you still have Jalen Waddle healthy. And it's like all you need is a couple of those fluky long plays to keep you in that game. But if I'm putting money on this game, it will be on Seattle at 4.5. I don't think this line is ballooned to the point with a backup quarterback where it makes me overly nervous. A lot of considerations for my final game, John. I considered the Atlanta Falcons plus 3.5 at home against the Kansas City Chiefs. I eventually opted to go against that. I considered the New York Giants at plus 6.5. Considered the Commanders at plus 7.5. But in the end, we're going with my heart, and we are going with the Detroit Lions at the Arizona Cardinals. They are 3-point favorites. Number was at 2.5 earlier today. That's when I was able to jump on it. But even at 3, I'm still okay with that. I think this is a big bounce back spot for the Detroit Lions. We talked about Tampa Bay earlier and how that was somewhat of a false final. Detroit dominated every aspect of that game other than 2 terrible turnovers, some clock mismanagement, and not being able to convert in the red zone. And you always wonder about the ghosts of Jared Goff past, creeping back up. And we've seen a little bit of that over these first 2 weeks of the season. But I think this is a recommit to the run spot, a refocus spot for the Detroit Lions. I think they will be locked in for this game against Arizona. I don't think the Cardinals are catching anybody off guard. I think they maybe caught the Rams a little bit off guard in week 2. I think they certainly caught the Bills off guard early in week 1 before the Bills were able to storm back. I just don't think this is a very good Arizona Cardinals defense. I think they were in a really good spot against the banged up Rams last week, and they didn't really get exposed in the way that most good teams will expose them. And I think that's exactly what the Detroit Lions do. I think they can win this game for the most part on the ground. It was good to see Amon-Ra St. Brown more involved last week. Maybe this is the week that Sam Laporta really breaks out. He's been quiet through these first 2 weeks. The Detroit Lions, John, are getting pressure on 33% of opponent dropbacks this season. They have the #1 pass rush grade in the NFL, according to PFF. They have the #3 run defense grade. They're the #1 tackling team in the NFL. I think this is a big regression spot for the Arizona Cardinals, who admittedly have been a very fun team. Kyler Murray has looked fantastic through 2 weeks, but I think this is kind of a reminder spot for the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, you build a great case there. My initial lean was on the Cardinals just as a home underdog that has looked, peppy and scrappy to this point. The one thing that would scare me if I'm taking the Lions here is that by virtue of the Lions being so good against the run, you're daring Arizona to throw more. And that's where I think they're at their best. Kyler's been better on his deep accuracy thus far this year, especially compared to where he was a year ago coming off of the ACL injury. The addition of Marvin Harrison, whereas everyone was kind of writing his obituary this time a week ago, I think everyone's tried to delete those from the internet. He looked pretty incredible, especially in that first quarter. McBride is cooking along nicely. I think that those kind of tertiary pieces in that passing game. But I think the fly in the ointment there is Aiden Hutchinson is a huge problem for this offensive line. Like, he got 4.5 sacks last week against a Tampa offensive line that I would grade out as better than what Arizona has. So if they're trying to mitigate the Cardinals, running, they're also going to be running into an issue of getting that Detroit pass rush going. So I'm still gonna ride with the Cards. They're kind of my sneaky team. They've been my team to get out of the basement in their division this year. That's looking good, unfortunately, with the Rams kind of falling by the wayside. But I think the Lions definitely have a chance to bounce back here.
All right. Hey, I'm happy to go head to head on this one. We will revisit this on the week 4 edition of the RotoWire betting pod. By the way, Lions have won 8 straight games against the spread following a straight up loss. So that's a trend that we like. And the total in this game is up at 51.5, excuse me, as it should be. But totals of 50 plus over the last 2 seasons are 13-2 to the under. I'm not saying we don't see fireworks, but something to consider if you're looking into that total again at 51.5. John, let's turn our attention to the prop market for week 3, and we'll run through our list of props that we like. Anything jumping out to you midweek?
Well, you may not think that Carolina is going to be a font of prop interest, but the Raiders are bad against the run.
They are.
I think that there will be a little bit of a jump start to this offense with Andy Dalton back there. I think it's going to look a little bit more like a normal NFL offense. Not a good one, but it will look like an NFL offense in some form or fashion. And I think Chuba Hubbard is set up really nicely here. I think if the Panthers get in close, I think it's Chuba time. So Chuba, anytime touchdown, plus 155. Going back to that Rams-Cardinals game, or I'm sorry, the Lions-Cardinals game, I do like Jahmyr Gibbs. I think that his rushing prop is a bit low. I think, like you said, this is a really good spot for the Lions to run the ball. So 49.5, I like the over there. Keep an eye on CeeDee Lamb. I initially liked the over on his prop, but I'm not sure if he practiced on Wednesday. Might be dealing with a little something, but I think that the Ravens secondary is very gettable. But on the other side, I think the Ravens run defense is extremely stout with Roquan Smith and Travis Jones coming on, Justin Madubuike. So I like, even though it's a low number, Ezekiel Elliott under 30.5 rushing yards. And then we've yet to see a Will Levis rushing yardage prop posted, but we loved the 10.5 over last week. That guy can run. If nothing else, that guy's going to run at least a little bit. So anything under 15 yards is posted at the books. I'm taking the over.
All right. I like it. You mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs in that Cardinals-Lions game. I like David Montgomery and his rushing prop. I'm fine with the over 51.5 rushing yards. You can get that at -115 at the DraftKings Sportsbook. Anytime touchdown, by the way, for Montgomery, it's in the minuses. We're talking -130 for an anytime TD for Montgomery, and I'm okay, eating a little bit of value there. I mentioned Tony Pollard earlier in the show. I like Tony Pollard anytime touchdown against Green Bay. Get that at plus 110. Jamar Chase, anytime touchdown, plus 120, John. This is a terrible, terrible Commanders defense. They have hemorrhage yards, especially passing yards, to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who essentially called off the dogs midway through that game. Malik Neighbors had what might be the biggest game of his entire season last week. I mean, if Daniel Jones and Malik Neighbors are carving you up like that, it makes you wonder what an 0-2 Bengals team is going to do. I don't know if T. Higgins is going to be back. I think there's some encouragement that maybe he makes his debut in week 3. I don't think it matters. I think he might be on a pitch count anyway. I love Jamar Chase this week. Anytime touchdown at plus 120. Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is one of my, I wouldn't even call him a breakout at this point because it feels like he's already broke out, but I think this is the week that he breaks onto the national scene, outside of the fantasy community. I think he is poised for a massive day against the Carolina Panthers, and you can get Brock Bowers to have at least 50 receiving yards right now at plus 120. Honestly, I'm okay taking that up to like 70 plus receiving yards. You can get that at plus 320 right now. This is a guy who's had 17 targets over the last 2 games. He's caught 15 of those. He's essentially been the tight end 1 in fantasy. He's been easily the most consistent tight end in all of fantasy over the last 2 weeks. And we can talk about Carolina all we want and the difference that Andy Dalton might make. Yeah, he probably raises the tide for everybody in that offense. Benching Bryce Young does nothing for your defense. This has been a terrible defense, a defense that lost Derek Brown in week 1. Like, Bryce Young is a part of the problem for Carolina, but this defense, I think, deserves just as much blame. And I think this is a really good spot for that Vegas passing game and Brock Bowers, because Vegas can't run the ball. And maybe they get it going against Carolina, but I think you still have to win through the air. I think this is a huge spot for Brock Bowers. And I will just mention here, John, I'm not going to bet this one, but if you are curious, Chargers Steelers, which is carrying a total of about 35.5 right now, no touchdown in that game is 30-1.
It might be that big of a rock fight there in Pittsburgh. That's going to be a real lunch pail type of outing.